second parcel here, and it's not ringing enough for me.
Well, let's gavel this to order. Yuko Asada and Mia Gormandy-Benjamin. It's awesome to see you both. And this is a real treat for me just because I get to talk to friends of mine who I know and colleagues and people I don't know. But this is the first episode of the Pan and Tune podcast with Yuko and Josh, and you are our first illustrious guest. And I want us to start off a little bit with some context behind what the podcast is. And Yuko, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you and I have been chatting a bit, but the actual idea for a podcast, I think, came from you.
No. You
No,
actually,
I'm going to blame it
I
on
think
you.
you mentioned about it like last summer after I was on your podcast,
Oh,
and
okay.
you mentioned about like possibly talking to different people in Pan from different parts of the world.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was involved in another project, and there was just so much going on in 2020, as we all know. Um, but I did contact you recently at the end of February
Mhm.
after being on a panel discussion for NSSBE conference. And I listened to Andre White and Sheldon Twait's The Arranger's Corner. And I checked out a symposium that was held at the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the session was on PAM manufacturing or PAM business. And that really, really made me think so much about what's going on globally. And I also started wondering about my own identity. So, I call Mia, I call you, Josh, and I was like, let's, maybe we can, talk about it, have guests. And yeah, so yeah, that's how it
Well,
started.
I appreciate you sort of refreshing my memory there. I always like to pretend. I mean, I just assume every good idea is somebody else's, so I just assumed it was yours. But
Oh,
the
no.
when you mention words, the word identity, and I'll say for me, one of the things in this last year, and I don't, Mia, I don't know if this resonates at all, but we've had a lot of time at home just staring at screens, and you start to see everybody now has a thought on what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And I kind of got inside my head a lot. And I think obviously around the George Floyd murder, there was a lot of just society sort of erupted, all for reasons I are absolutely, yes, absolutely. It was insane. But the idea of like where you're from, what you have authority over, what you can say with, what is your identity? And like, there's part of me that identifies as a steel drummer, but I was born in a cornfield, and like, there's only so far that can take me in terms of where I have authority. But I've been very fortunate to work with people like Cliff and go to Trinidad and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, this idea of identity is complicated, and I'm curious, Mia, maybe just to get things rolling, can you just refresh me and Yuko about where, baby Mia, like what, and I say that sort of like you have a baby now, and so now you have, little tiny baby that you made, and they're going to go on a similar path that maybe you had. And I'm curious, can you take us back a little bit and give us the nickel and dime tour of like what brought you to Cliff, and then maybe we can sort of go from there.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, in Belmont to be specific, which is just an area of Port of Spain. And I started playing the steel pan when I was 5 years old because my older brother, my parents bought a steel pan for my older brother, and they brought an instructor to teach him, but he was not interested at all in the pan, and instead I was kind of reaching over my head to play this instrument that I guess I thought was amazing. I don't know. And the lessons for him eventually turned into lessons for me. So, in primary school and secondary school growing up, I entered a number of competitions. Actually, the first competition I entered, I was 6 years old, and it was a competition at my mom's office where they had all the kids come and do like a talent competition. So there were kids from, I think maybe from 5 years old all the way up to like teenager.
Oh.
And I won that competition. And my parents were like, what? I think they were surprised, it's like, oh, we are probably onto something here. And then they helped support and push my life of music. So, growing up for me, I had a very busy life because I had to balance school, and gigs, solo performances, and I was a stage side member of Trinidad All Stars, which I joined when I was 9 years old. So from very early on, I was taught how to balance, between work. I'm sorry, not work, but gigging, school, not performances as a soloist, performances with Trinidad All Stars, and performances for my school because I was also in the school bands as well. So yeah, I remember just a couple of years ago finding one of my schedules that I created when I was about 14 years old, and I had about 3 or 4 gigs a week.
Oh.
So like 3 or 4 of those would be all stars gigs because at that time they were gigging every weekend, and then I would have 1 or 2 solo performances weekly.
So this is the stage side band for All Stars, is
Yes,
that right?
for all stars
Could
stage
you
side.
just
Yeah.
explain for like I don't think I understood. I used to think people were saying stateside.
Oh no,
And
stage
no, I know. But that
side.
wasn't like till I started teaching at NYU and working with Panorama bands in Brooklyn
All right.
and hearing that word, and I was just afraid to be like, are you saying state or stage? What do you mean? And can you just explain what a stage side band is?
Oh yeah, sure. So steel bands in Trinidad and Tobago have 2 sides. We have a Panorama side, which are members of the band who come out solely for Panorama, and that can be 150 players. But then there's a core Trinidad All Stars steel band that comprises of 30 to 50 members, and they play throughout the year. So the stage side is are those core members that perform gigs throughout the year. Sometimes we go on tour. I've been on tour with Trinidad All Stars to Australia. Sometimes we perform for engagements, pan jams, sometimes weddings, so it just all throughout the year, those types of gigs representing the steel orchestra. If you're performing at those gigs, that's not Panorama, you're on the stage side. And it functions throughout the year.
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I want that official sort of definition of what a stage side out be, just to help dummies like me who are coming up who might have no idea what that is.
No, it's fine. So yeah, so I was on the stage side and stuff like that, and then when I was 15, I performed at a concert that just happened to have Larry Snyder. And this entire time I used to tell the story, I thought Cliff was the one who was in the audience, but I found out that it was Liam.
Oh.
So I've told this story like several times, and I'm like, oh, Cliff and Larry Snyder were in the audience, and they heard me perform, and they, said, oh, you need to come to NIU. But it was Liam in the audience, not Cliff. My father told me this like just recently, because I think I was saying something, and he was like, no, it was Liam. I was like, what? Because I didn't actually speak with them. Like, my father was the one that was really talking to them.
For some reason, I thought Cliff said that he met you then, but yeah.
Yeah, and now come to think about it, I met Cliff at NIU.
Oh, okay.
I spoke to Cliff on the phone several times before I went to NIU, in preparing to come. But I think I met him officially in person at NIU at the airport.
And you met Larry. You met Dr. Larry Snyder.
Yes,
at the University of Akron.
Yes, I met Dr. Larry Snyder at that event in Trinidad. It was an award ceremony, and I performed, I think, Flight to the Bumblebee and Summertime. And it's so funny. I did not want to go to that performance at all because I was sick. And my parents were like, you have to go. You already said yes. You have to stick to your word. It doesn't matter if you're sick. You have, so I was already like, I don't want to, but I've always been taught, once you go on stage, you have to leave all that stuff off, off the stage. So I performed, and thankfully I went through with it because Dr. Larry Snyder and Liam Teague, they were both in the audience. And that's how I came up to University of Akron the next year.
Okay.
Yes.
That was prior to you studying at NIU? That was
yes, I was still in secondary school. Yeah, I was still in secondary school. And so this would have been, let me see. So I did the performance, I think, in 2004, like maybe late in the year. And then 2005, April, I came to University of Akron and the NIU as a guest. And then I started attending NIU in August 2005. So I was finishing up secondary school at that time. So sorry,
Yeah.
that seemed like a very long way to tell you how I got to Cliff.
No. That's it. Yuko, do you turn the floor over to you here?
Yeah,
Thank you
I
for that.
remember meeting Mia and Mario, her father. Yeah, at that time, and yeah, everybody in the audience were in awe. Like we were like, "Whoa, who's that? Young lady, performing the pan." And yeah, and that was Mia. Yep.
Well, Mia, whenever you were like, what I don't want to presume. Like, I think if when I was, how old were you? You were 16 or 15 at the time
When what? When
when
I
you
started at NIU?
when you came to Akron and then eventually to the next year to
I
NIU.
I think I was 16 already, yeah.
I mean, if someone had come to me and said, "Josh, you're really good at what you do. We know that you were born here in Dover, Ohio. We'd love for you to come to Trinidad and work here and study there." Like at 16, I think I was more worried about like my armpit hairs that weren't growing in yet. Like I can't even imagine, let alone picking up and moving to another country, but also another country where yes, the language is similar, but not exactly. Like there's a different culture. Like what as a
Yeah.
16-year-old, what was that? How are those conversations with your folks or even inside your own head about like where you were headed?
I don't know. I feel as though everything just sort of moved and I just moved with it. I don't know what I was really thinking at the time, but I do remember my first moments at NIU and a number of people did not understand what I was saying. Like nobody understood me. My accent, they couldn't get it.
Mm.
And I tried to communicate to the bus driver, asking him where I want to go. He doesn't understand what I'm saying, and I think that's how Sharissa Granger and she was also a student there, kind of became friends too, because she came a semester before me and she's from Aruba. And she was like, she knew, like, she went through this already and knew how to say certain things for people to understand. So she would have to be like my translator, even though I'm speaking English, you know.
Well,
So
I've been around Trinidadians enough, but there's still moments now where like I like if Kendall and Jerian are talking to each other, I don't understand anything. And I'm now like there. I used to be like, can you guys tell me what you're like? And now I just am like, I'm not going to stop somebody from the way they're talking if I don't understand it. I just need to spend. I need to spend more time with the language. It's like I can't go to Spain and be like, can you guys slow down for me? Like may llamo Josh. Like that's not always how it works. But like, what were some things when you came to DeKalb? Like when you say that you had to, so you needed a translator. Like, what were some things that you had to change about the way you spoke?
well, I had to slow down a lot.
Mm.
I fortunately didn't bother me as much because there were people who did understand me, like Yuko.
Mm.
Yuko was there from the
Cliff and
start.
Liam.
Cliff, Liam, Sion Gomez was there, Sophia Supero. And so there were number of other Trinidadians there and people who were used to hearing Trinidadians speak.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel completely out of everything. But what I had to do was slow down my speech and pronounce my words. I have to, kind of make sure that every word I said, I enunciated, as best as I could. Because I was also kind of fed up in my classes. I would go like days without speaking, and then a teacher would ask a question and I would answer, and then the entire class would just turn around and stare at me, like, what? you know. So in those moments, I'm like, oh, right, yeah, I guess they didn't know that I wasn't from the United States. But yeah, eventually over time, I kind of learned how to, speak in a way, not change my accent, but speak in a way that people can understand me. And it became important when I had to teach, because I can't stand in front of a classroom or in front of panists from the United States and expect them to adjust to me, kind of like what you were saying, Josh, right? It's like, because I am teaching them, now I am forced to have to speak in a way that they understand what I'm saying.
That makes sense as you're saying it, but just like the sort of the again, like the part of me that I'm trying to check about my own when I'm in a space that doesn't look like me, I feel like I want to defer as much as I can to the room and be like, okay, I don't have no idea what they said, but I can see everybody starting at measure 35 and they're playing softer, so I'm going to try that. Like,
Right.
that's okay, but there's a point at which like that's actually not doing anybody any good. I need to raise my hand and be like, can you just say that again for me? Like, but you want to be careful. Like, you don't want to be non-Trinidadian. I mean, that's like that's who you are. And if my students come to NYU and they play with Phase 2 or something, like, or let's say they play with whoever, like Boogsy's not going to be like, they can't raise their head and be like, Boogsy, can you slow down a little bit for me? Like, that's not going to happen. And so, like, in some respects, I feel like it's good training to be in a room with folks who speak English, but not the kind you do.
And that has happened, because actually I remember Sion Gomez. He's a grad assistant, and I was doing my bachelor's, and we were coming from a gig, and I used to feel band. We were coming from a gig, and we were trying to set up the room. So Sion walks in, and he's like, "All right, everybody, set up one time." and he walks out, and I'm like, "Yeah." But I realized I'm the only one that started moving, and everybody just stood there like, "What?"
Oh, because we didn't understand. A lot of people
understand what one time meant.
Yeah.
In Trinidad, one time means now.
Right.
Do it now. Immediately. So, and he said it with such urgency, but nobody understood. And it was kind of funny, because then I was like, that means now. I had to I can't explain. So they were still, they were definitely still getting the Trinidadian in us, but with still, of course, the small adjustments of making sure that we're clear as well.
Yeah, I have a question. So what was it like to come to NIU and learn to play at NIU Steel Band in comparison to, All Stars and other bands in Trinidad? What was different?
Actually, the first time I played in the NIU Steel Band, I was like in shock, because I came from Trinidad. I've been playing All Stars how many years. I've been doing a lot of playing, but we never really read a lot in Trinidad. So even though I did my grade 8 theory exams, and I understand theory and I understand music, sight reading was always a weakness of mine. So when I got to NIU, it was just like, oh, here are the scores. All right, let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, band starts. I'm like, oh my God, I was in complete shock. I'm like, oh my gosh, this entire steel band is gonna show me up. I felt, like I was behind, immediately coming to NIU, but that's how I learned to sight read, because it was like by force. It's like, here is this score, get it done, and I think NIU Steel Band was performing in Chicago the first year that I came. I think y'all had a gig in Chicago, I think for the Carnival, Chicago Carnival.
Yeah, right.
And Cliff came and said, oh, here's the stack of scores. This is what we're playing on, Saturday, or whatever day it was. And I just looked at the scores like, what? So the whole steel band had time. Of course, you all had time to practice, and it was pieces that you all did the semester before. Right. But I was new, So, and if I was able, I could do something like that now, but I definitely could not have done something like that, when I first started at NIU. So my experience definitely now coming in was, oh my gosh, all of these members can play, and not only can they play, they can read. So I need to step up my game, make sure I can read too. Yeah.
Yeah, and something else I wonder is, so, what was it like to hear, a U.S. steel band playing calypso and soca? Like,
it was different, but I don't think I was judging it in any kind of way. I think because I was so focused on trying to read properly, I didn't really think about something like that until maybe months into being, at NIU. But because maybe it wasn't, I don't know, it just didn't register at least. Mm-hmm. So it's not until I got really comfortable with reading and playing is when I started to self-analyze. Oh, okay, so we're playing calypso and this is the groove, and that's a little different to what we do in Trinidad, and so those thoughts didn't come until probably months after, start.
When those thoughts, I'm sorry to stick on it, but like I want to drill down a little bit. When those thoughts did be just, I mean, because you are, I can understand you being insecure about the sight reading thing and being like, oh my God, I got, and so you can just get inside your head and you're just working. But as soon as you,
Right.
like, Mia, you're a virtuoso at the instrument. So like, there's a point at which you're like, okay, cool, I'm done with the sight reading, and then you look back and you're like, things start to register to you. Like, what were some things that again, like I want to be careful of any value judgments like this is good and this is bad, but like what were things that were like when you say, oh, that's a calypso beat, but that's not how we would do it in Trinidad? What were some concrete examples of that where, I mean, even at a place like NYU where Cliff, I mean, is one of the horse's mouths, like he's one of the OGs, and even at a place like NYU, there's things that I think because it's at an institution, Cliff, there are some limitations that come into play. You can't just walk into NIU and rehearse till 3 a.m. for
Right.
7 hours because kids have classes, like you could do with the All-Stars. Like, what were some things that were different for you as you started noticing them?
I think the first thing that I actually noticed was the strums. So even though the strumming pattern is the same or similar to what we play in Trinidad, I feel as though it's very metronomical. Otherwise, it's like bam, 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 bam. It's like very strict. And I think in Trinidad, it's not as strict. There's like a relaxation to it where it's not necessarily fitting exactly where the music score says it should. So there's a sort of also like a light accent, like a as opposed to ta 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 ta. So I think the first thing that I noticed was the strumming. Where it was. I think maybe some of the members were like, okay, this is what's in the score, so this is what I have to play, and I have to play it. They practice with a metronome. The concept of practicing with a metronome to me only came about when I came to NIU. And I remember Liam saying you have to practice with metronome. I'm like, I have time, and I could.
You're like, you have to practice with a metronome.
So that was a new thing for me, and I think having that sort of strict approach is sort of changes the groove, of the music. And it's I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or good, I'm just saying it's a difference, that I observed. That's the first difference that I observed.
Sorry, go ahead, Yuka.
I was just going to say, so for somebody like me or somebody from outside of, Trinidad and Tobago, when you all would say groove and feel, we would be like, what does that mean? Like,
Right.
How do we play that? And the best way for us to capture that was to listen to you guys, like listen to how you play, how you express,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was something that was difficult to capture.
When you mentioned the strum, Mia, I was finishing up to some teaching with Kendall Williams after Princeton. We had a class this afternoon, and we were talking about. He's talking about wanting to think about what could be a steel band method book, and the first words out of his mouth were like, "We got to document the All-Stars strum, and we have to show people what it is, and like show where he was talking all about the like little subtleties within the strum of the All-Stars. Like that's not even like looking at how Trinidadians strum. That's like one
Right.
band that when they start playing, I mean, I remember being at the ICP competition in 2015, and I think the low drum player in the engine room started playing something, and the whole crowd just went bonkers because they know what that means, and it's just there's something that's hard to translate. You can't write it on paper. It's like when Trinidadians play triplets. It's like, like you can't write that, and that's awesome. And we need to. I wish we had a notation for that. That like every time we write a triplet, you write like Trinidad style.
Right.
Yeah. Trinidad style. Well, other than the strum, I mean, for me, I feel like one of the things, and I'm curious for you, Mia, because you've done a lot of master classes, you go traveling around and you see different bands play. In addition to that strum thing, the thing for me as an educator that, specifically at NYU, that's been the biggest sort of reality check for me in terms of feel is, for the first 5 or 6 years at NYU, it's like we could play a tune. We would do a reggae tune, and then we would do a soca, and we would whatever. We never did any panoramas initially. And I'd be like, okay, we have a steel band. It's not, why does it not sound like a thing? And then, then I worked with BSO for the ICP competition in 2015 and had been working with Kendall a little bit in Brooklyn, and Jerrion Williams comes in the room and I'm like, oh, like the engine room, what the hell am I doing? And I feel like I approached it because of my Western classical studies similarly to the way an orchestra is approached. It's like the percussion's in the back. And we'll deal with them only if we hear them in the wrong place. Like that's all we're going to talk about. But then you dig in and you realize every engine room, like the All-Stars, has that low drum, which is maybe as responsible for the feel of that band as Smooth is, and you look at Phase 2, the way Bugsy arranges for that band and the drummers he brings in. If you look at Skiffle Bunch, the way Kendall and Mark and Odie write for Jerrion to play, like as soon as you take Jerrion or that engine room out of the mix, all of a sudden I realize it's like, oh my God, I need to spend more time with the engine room than I'm spending with the leads. Like that seems to be the missing piece of my puzzle anyway. Does anything I'm saying resonate?
Absolutely. That's the second thing I was going to say. The first one was the strums, but the thing is the strumming and the engine room work together, right? It all makes up the groove, so even within the engine room, you see, for me, growing up in Trinidad, I spent most of my time playing pan, right? So the engine room was something that was, they have their stuff sorted. I don't have to, so it's not until I came to the US, it's where I was thinking, oh wait, this engine room doesn't sound like our engine room. What, and I had to start thinking, what's the difference, with ours in Trinidad and the US? And I mean, immediately I could pick up on some things, like, okay, well, maybe the drummer is playing a bit strict, or the groove that they're playing is just, sort of the starting groove as opposed to adding their sort of element to it, or maybe the iron is just taka, 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 instead of gang, gang, like the iron, you have to have that kind of, let me see, what word am I looking for? It's a messiness to it.
Like a lilt.
It's like
it sort of lilts along. It doesn't walk comfortably, but it's like
right.
It has a swagger to it.
Exactly. So it's like it can't be perfect. If it's perfect, where every strike is every hit is hit the same way, then it doesn't work. Like when you hear Cliff play the iron, and you were to really listen to him, you would realize that there's such a voice that's almost saying something. Because there's that nuance, or this sort of element that changes, and it moves with what he feels like, and so that is what was missing, is that sort of, I don't want to say improvised, but it is kind of an improvisation in a way, because I don't think Cliff or any Iron Man would plan, how they go. It's just something that you feel and you do. So I think it's that sort of feel and something that's sort of ingrained in you. It's like it's something you grew up listening to. It's something that's so deeply rooted in every day here in Trinidad. So when the music is then played by people who may not have had that same sort of experience growing up, they may have listened to other types of music. They kind of have to learn the cultural feel of it, and I think it's that sort of feel and nuance and feeling comfortable enough and confident enough to sort of make those kind of changes within the engine room. Because even when you listen to like the low drum, and it kind of imitates like a dum 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 dum. Even when you listen to that, sometimes they go to tinky to think to, so there's like these small changes that that the whole engine room feels together, and then if the bass drum does to think to kink, and then you hear the iron kind of respond, so it's kind of a communication of feeling, I would say. And the only reason that I thought about this is because one time when I went back to Trinidad, I was already in the US studying, and I went back to Trinidad. And for Panorama and All Stars had an engine room section practice, because the engine room has section practice too, right? Tenors have section practice. So does the percussion, we call them percussion section, right? The engine room, they have section. And while they were doing the section practice in front of the entire band, I just sat there and I was like, I really need to understand how to communicate this, when I go back to the US. And that is how I just sat there and I was so engrossed in it. And I was thinking so hard about what everybody was doing. I was like, yeah, that's what it is. It's kind of like a natural communication that takes place.
It's something that I think if I had all the money in the world, I would come to Trinidad for a year and do nothing but play double seconds. Then I'd come down the next year and I'd do nothing but play tenor bass. And then I'd come down the next year and then I would play iron. And I would just I would go to every band I could to be like, I want to see this. I want to see Desperados. I want to see Phase. I want to see Renegades, and just see how these engine rooms function. Because the thing that is hitting me now is that the engine room was the original steel band. I mean, there was no drum set, but it was all only rhythm to begin with.
Right. Yep.
It was biscuits. And when you say dud up, that's a 2-pitch drum that goes dud up. It has 2 pitches, and it's not even always the pitches of the tune that is being played. And
right.
I think there's no way in my high school, if in my high school steel band, Joan Wenzel, who was my teacher, would have said, Josh, on the iron during the minor section when the leads are doing this part, I need you to play more of a cutter part, and I need you to, on this section, play more straight. I would have had no idea what she was talking about, because I don't know what tambour bamboo is. I didn't know what bottle and spoon was. I didn't know what a foulet part was, what a cutter, what a boom, any of that stuff was. Knowing it now, I saw a picture of Smooth Edwards from UTT, with a bunch of students, and they had biscuit tins, they had the stalks of bamboo, and it's that needs to be happening at every steel band in the United States, just so that the engine room understands when they're going to get, you're actually playing some indigenous music.
Absolutely. Yes.
Sorry, there's no question there. That was just a.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and that's what I mean by it's sort of something that's ingrained, right? It kind of passes down, and it has influenced calypso, and calypso has influenced that, and so it's.
Well, Yuko, I actually have a question for you. One of the other things that blew me away from the ICP competition was seeing the band from Japan.
Oh, right.
And I'm going to be honest. I just, when I heard the band, I've been working with BSO all week, and I'm just in the Trini, this is what, and then Phase 2 plays. The band from Japan gets up there and they play, and I was just like, okay, cool. I didn't know anybody, but it sounded like a Japanese band playing the best version of calypso that they have. And I was like, I was a little cocky. I'm just going to be honest. I was like, okay, cool. As soon as they got done, the whole bandstand went nuts. Everybody just stayed there, yeah. And I was like, okay, well then I got to get rid of my own bullshit here, because that's I'm in the home of Pan, and they just received this Japanese band almost bigger than they received Phase 2. So I'm wrong about my perceptions here. I'm curious, I kind of want to know why Japan? How did Pan, talk to me like I'm 2. How did Pan get to Japan in the way that it did?
Even though I am Japanese, Mia is the expert in steel pan in Japan, because she did her research and field work to write her dissertation on steel pan in Japan. But, I'd say, it's music that people just fall in love with. So in the 1990s, bands like Renegades and Exodus went to Japan, and people just fell in love. And, they wanted to try it on their own. So people started to travel to Trinidad and Tobago, and they loved what they did so much that they wanted to try to imitate what Trimbagonians were doing, rather than trying to make it into our own thing, even though, I say even though, I haven't been living there for the past 30 some years. Mm-hmm. But how I understood was people from Japan loved the culture, the music, the people, the food from Trinidad and Tobago so much that they wanted to try to recreate what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, that doesn't apply to everybody. So at least from what I know, a lot of my friends wanted to play like Trimbagonians. They wanted to be able to express. So if you take a look at a lot of steel bands in Japan, they don't use music because that is not what Trimbagonians do. And when you don't use music, you're able to really focus on the music rather than just, trying to read music. So, naturally it, sounds better. in my opinion. And you can focus more on, how you show, your performance in addition to making yourself sound good. So, and, perhaps Mia and I were talking about, similarities between Trinidad and Tobago and Japan, and we are both island nations, from the, Eastern Asia and from the Caribbean, but, there are some similarities, I think.
In what?
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm from the island of Ohio. We don't like what. Talk to me a little bit about island culture. Like, what are some things specific to island countries that maybe I wouldn't understand?
I wonder if we have like strong sense of identity because we're not connected to other countries. So there's, I mean, of course, Japan was influenced by China and like now from so many different countries, but we're very Japanese. Japanese culture is very, distinct. And I can say the same about Trinidad and Tobago. So, perhaps, just having a stronger sense of identity. But at the same time, you can say, United States, there's so many people.
I haven't tattooed. I had tattooed Ohio on my wrist. I have not tattooed USA on my wrist. That feels like a step. I'm not so sure I'm ready to commit to that. I love my Ohio people. I'm from that. It's the heartland, baby. I'm okay with it. But it's not. I mean, I have an identity. I mean, Ohioans. Like I live in Connecticut right now. Lovely state. But there's a different state pride from people in Connecticut. There's not very, very many people I walk around who I see have a shirt that says I'm from Connecticut. Like it's just it's a different thing that I've noticed being from a state where like football, basketball, baseball, like Ohio, like we are the thing, and it's like I'm joking about tattooing it on my wrist, but I really like Ohio. Like it's a beautiful place and it's got a vibe and people are proud to be from there. And so that's really my only way when you say identity, that's really my only source of identity is like a state. But even that, it's like the west part is mountains, the upper or the eastern part is mountains, the upper west part is just flat. Like it's not like I identify with the hill people or anything from Ohio. It's just like it's a state. But musically too. I mean, it can. I mean, Mia, is anything that we're saying, Mia, for Trinidad? Like, what are you clocking here in terms of your experience as a Trinidadian?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I agree with everything you just said, and I think too, there's a sort of friendliness that comes and sort of family ties that come with Japan and Trinidad and Tobago. Like for example, when I was doing my research there. If I only made a mistake and stopped while I was walking and looked up, somebody was there to be like, "Can I help you? Are you looking for somewhere?" Like, "Oh no, I know I'm going, thanks." Like there was always, even though Tokyo, Yokohama is the largest city in the world, right? I think so. Yeah.
Is it really?
I think it's populated. Like it has the most amount of people or something like that. It's one of the highest, and you could probably correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm wondering like Shanghai, maybe. Like, I'm thinking of like cities like Shanghai, China, but Tokyo definitely, and Yokohama has.
Tokyo, Yokohama, at least at one point was the largest, it has the most amount of people or something like that. And when you think of large cities, I think of like New York. Like if I were to stop in the middle of the road and look up, like nobody's gonna ask me, are you okay? Are you lost? But then again, there's a different element to that, right? Because I can look like I'm from New York, whereas in Japan, it's very obvious that I'm not from Japan, so, but people were very, just strangers, were very open to, trying to help me, and I thought that's like a small island kind of thing, because not small island, islands, right? So when I came to, in Trinidad, it's very similar, I would say. So my example is carrying my pan, right? So, because I have my pan and I have my trolley and I struggle to go through doors all the time, right? So in Trinidad, if someone sees me going to the door, they'll be like, "Oh, let me get the door for you, open the door, or somebody might say, "Oh, can I carry that for you?" Like, "No, it's okay. I can take it myself." "Oh, let me take it up the steps for you." "Oh, no, it's okay." Whereas when I'm in the US, I expect no help. Like nobody. No,
I'm sorry.
Nobody opens the door. They will see me come in and they will go through the door and let it close on me. And of course, there's a few occasions that people will help, but it's.
Have I ever not held the door for you, Mia? Now I'm very self-conscious now.
Well, the thing is, it's not that I expect it, right? It's just something that's nice. I don't expect you to open it. I don't expect you to hold the door for me. Like, who am I? I expect to struggle through myself, but it's just I notice in Trinidad, I get offered more help than I would get offered, in the US, just in general, in my general experience. And this is me talking from a stranger's perspective. I'm talking about strangers' help. Like somebody who I have no idea who I am, I have no idea who they are, and they see me in the street or something. That's the circumstance I'm talking about.
Do you think that's British influence? Because how I understood is like British are taught mannerism, not that Americans aren't, but British have a certain mannerism that.
You mean on Trinidad, maybe?
Yeah, I wondered.
But Japan is similar, I feel as though that people offer to help, even though it's such a large city, and it seems as though everybody's kind of on their own track because, Japan during rush hour is like, if you step in the wrong line, you can get knocked over, right? Everybody's just walking, in all sorts of different directions really quickly, but you can still get help, if you need it. So yeah, and that's how I see some of the similarities between Japan and Trinidad.
Yuko, do you have a question on your mind? I have plenty. I can keep asking, but if is there something burning that you want to ask Mia?
I don't have a question, but I just find it really interesting how Mia, you're from Trinidad, but you lived in the United States for 10 years, and you also lived in Japan for like a couple months, or so your perspective is really, really unique, in comparison to many other people. So, but yeah, Josh, if you have questions.
Yeah, I pardon my ignorance on your wealth of knowledge about Japan and the start of it there, Mia, in the steel drum culture there. I'm curious, as an educator, what were some things you noticed in terms of your pedagogy when you go to Japan? Is there aside from the language difference, I'm sure there's issues there that you have to sort of work around. But like,
yes,
what are some things pedagogically? Is there anything in Japan that you teach that you don't have to deal with in the States and vice versa? Like, what are the issues with the way pan culture has grown in Japan that, issues is the wrong word. What are some of the things that have manifested naturally after it growing and the way it's grown in Japan versus the way the steel drum education and stuff has grown in the United States?
I think how Japanese panists interpret or understand the instruments is different. Like, for example, in doing my research, I noticed that there were like three main ways in which Japanese musicians and Japanese panists sort of use the instrument or sort of see or have their perspective be very different. So, for example, one of the ways is that the way that Yuko was talking about it, they're a group of Japanese panists who are like, this instrument is from Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to be able to play it just like Trinbagonians, and then you have bands like Manish, Tokyo, right, where Manish Robinson, who's a Trinidadian, is over there teaching, and pedagogically, he teaches just like you would teach in Trinidad, everything's by rote, they practice for long hours, and they're just dedicated, I remember talking to one of his bass players. They literally sold their car and bought another car just so that they can transport their bass. So, and she bought her own bass. This is my bass, and I need a car that can transport this. So I'm going to sell my car. So I was like, wow, that's a different level of dedication there.
I do not make my car purchases based on maybe I would choose double seconds or something. Like maybe not
right.
12 bass or 6 bass or whatever.
Right. No, she was dedicated to the 6 bass, right? So you have, that sort of school. Then you have Panorama Steel Orchestra, for example, this is the orchestra that performed for ICP in 2015, where Harada-san, who's the instructor, even though he does things by rote, some of the music's written. So some people read, some people, learn by rote, and then it's all about his composition and his feelings. So when they came to Trinidad to perform, they didn't want to be like a Trinidadian group. Their sort of their aim was to hear that sort of Japanese voice come out. But remember the competition requires calypso, so it still had to be a calypso, so they had to do that within the realm of the competition. So, and I think the reason why they got such a big applause is also because they're from Japan. I think people were just amazed to find out that one, there was a steel band from Japan, and two, wow, this music is so different. And, it's like, it's something that I think people just have never seen and didn't understand, so it was just like, because even in talking to some of my family members who were there, who aren't necessarily Panists, they're just fans of Pan. And they're like, oh my God, did you see the Japanese band? After the whole competition went by, everybody was talking about the Japanese band, because it was like, they came from Japan all the way to Trinidad, like they were just completely blown of the situation of it, and then that they were able to play so well, in addition to that. But it was different, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be clear that I don't want to seem disingenuous when I was saying what I was saying about the Japanese band earlier. Like, it floored me because I think I didn't know what I was seeing. And the way you just put it, because I've known Cliff since I was 17, and so in my head it's like, well, that's the way steel bands gotta be, like that's, I know that's not the right way, but in my head that was the first, that's what imprinted on me was Cliff Alexis, Confusion Reggae, hearing his panoramas, and then going to play with Bugsy, and it's like, and then I hear this band, and then you put it perfectly that it was Trinidad and Tobago art form with a sort of evolved Japanese voice. Like,
yes,
that sort of thing where you said like it was a Japanese stamp on it, like, to me, that makes it make way more sense. And because my rooting in Japanese music comes from contemporary classical percussion studies, where marimba music is one of the big, in terms of like college percussion studies, marimba and xylophone music is right. Like Keiko Abe is like our goddess in that world, Of course, there's a million different other called musics that come from Japan, but in terms of my experience with it, so when I saw it, I was like, oh, like, okay, all right, this reminds me of a lot of that music that I was playing in college, but if it was calypso, you know what I mean? Like, it had that little spin on it in a way that I thought was, now as a 41-year-old, a little bit more maturity, I can look at and be like, rather than being like all huffy and puffy that they don't sound like BSO, like, now I see this as a natural evolution from, years and years of being dedicated to that art form. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of put that out there, like,
yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah, what I admired about them too is that they came, they're coming to the land of Pan, right? Not wanting to be like a Trinidadian, and I admired that about them, because it was I think everybody else was trying to capture that Panorama sound, and they were like, no, like, we're gonna sound like us, Panorama Steel Orchestra, and pedagogically, they kind of, I've been to their rehearsals. I performed with them in Japan actually, and I have to be honest, it was actually quite hard to keep up with them, because they were, when I mean keep up, I mean energy-wise, they were so passionate. They were so passionate about playing that their rehearsals were just like song, 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 break, eat, stop. So it was just like going. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm tired. And then when I performed with them, it's like halfway through the I think it was like an hour long, halfway through the set, I was like ready to like pass out on the floor because I was so tired, because we were like jumping, and it was just like this like so much energy, that I could just feel the love for the instrument, but I can't say that they think about it. I didn't get the sort of impression that they thought about it like, oh, we want to be like, Trinidadians. That's not what it was. This was an instrument that they know is from Trinidad, but they're using it to express themselves, And Harada-san, who's the instructor, kind of uses the instruments and the orchestra to express his music as well. He has a number of records. I think he's played with Ray Holman, so he has a unique voice to the instrument that it sort of resonates in this way that then translates to us who are outside of Japan as Japanese. I I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed Sonics too. To me, I was just taking in everything. So they're different. To me, there were different schools of how pan was taught and how it was, you know, how the education was sort of passed on or how the music was taught. I don't know, you if you have a different opinion or what your
No, no,
perspective
no.
of
I
Panorama.
just find it really, I'm just thinking about how, people from Trinidad and Tobago view different bands in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And, me being Japanese, like I'm so happy to hear how well received Japanese steel bands are. Sometimes, that's not what we hear about, say, steel bands from the United States.
Mm.
Why do you think that is?
Mm.
I mean, for the reasons why you explained really well on like how some Japanese steel bands are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. I think it has a lot to do with the history between the countries, to be honest.
Mm.
I think for some people in Trinidad, when they hear US band or US anybody, they're like, because there have been a number of people, who would have come to Trinidad and take advantage of the situation and profit, from our music and our arrangements and stuff like that without sort of paying homage to the musicians and to the arrangers and the composers. So I think a number of people, especially in, let's just say, that generation of panics, like Bugsy Sharp's generation, Cliff Alexis generation, so that sort of generation of panists have seen some people come and take advantage, right? So they get very skeptical, and I feel as though that may have passed down, to the younger generations of musicians, to this idea that, oh, they're coming to steal it, or oh no, I'm not, gonna deal with them because they probably just want to, fill their pockets with our stuff, So I do know that there are a number of people who think that way, and it's not everybody. Um, and the people who have met US panists or have gone to the US or have close ties with panists who maybe come to Trinidad every year for Panorama may not think that way because they have direct ties to people who are genuine and who, really want to see the instrument flourish and actually pay credit to the people who would have come before and who would have made certain developments in the instruments and who would have composed music, so it's I think socially, within Trinidad, that's my guess as to why US bands may not have as strong, of an impact in that way, if that's what you're asking. That's my guess. I can't say that as fact, but that's sort of what I've seen, just being in Trinidad, not just as a younger person before I got to NIU, but now as a professional, now that I'm back. I've heard people say certain things, and it's like I can't really blame them because it actually happened. So it's like if somebody came and burnt you and went back, then I don't want to get burned again. So you just assume. I think in the human mind, you assume everybody who is like this person will do that to me, not realizing that everybody's an individual, and just because there are other people from the same country doesn't necessarily mean that that's what everybody is about.
Well, I definitely. I mean, Yuka, we've all had sort of off the record conversations about cultural appropriation, and I'll even go a step further and say cultural thievery. I mean, appropriation. I don't know how we all define it, but to me, appropriation has a sort of softer, sort of like absorbing of something and making it into something. To me, and I think it's because I again, Cliff was my patient zero for me, and if I mean, you two can certainly, you've been in the room with Cliff more than I have. Like, he does not mince words. If he doesn't
No.
like you, he will tell you and right to your face. And and I remember my first trip to Trinidad. There was when people found out where I was from, there was easily 2 weeks of sort of like I knew people saw me, and I just kind of was like, I gotta shut my mouth and just learn my part. If I can play my part, then I feel like that's currency here, and I have to, I can't fix the other thing, which is my white skin and where I'm from, but I can get better at this instrument and try to show respect that way. And it was impressed upon me at that time in several different various conversations that will remain private. We won't go on the record here, that there are people who will never set foot in Trinidad. And if they do, it's not going to end well. And I was like 19 years old and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what could possibly be that serious, you know? And then I learned. And through people like Cliff and Liam and Bugsy and all these other folks. And it really at that moment, I don't think I realized it. I'm 41 now and I was 20 or 19 at the time. It bums me out because simple acts like that, a simple act of thievery, no matter how small, can set people back 20 years. You know, and that's the real danger when people talk about cultural appropriation or thievery or racism and all of this stuff. It's like one tiny little thing is all you have to do to be not allowed off a plane in Trinidad. And there were many tiny things and many large things that happened that I was made privy to, but it just makes the work so much harder for everybody else. You know, like why? Yeah. You know. And anyway, again, no question there, but just sort of agreeing with you that I think sometimes as a U.S. pan player, you're not aware. Unless somebody like Cliff told me. It's not like you can open a book and read about when the cultural appropriation happened in Trinidad in 1983 or whatever. It's like that stuff's not written down in a history book. So, I mean, I guess my question is, how do we fix this? And is that our job? Is our job to continue with positive, like what are ways to remedy that with some of that older generation? I feel like I remedied it between me and Cliff. I feel like I built trust with Cliff, but it took me like 15 years of sitting at that diner in DeKalb and just getting yelled at and then coming back the next year and him saying something else. And then by the time we got 15 years in, he's family, you know. But for somebody who just is never going to have, there are people who unfortunately will go through their whole life and never cross paths with the Trinidadian, but will play pan their whole life, you know. So what? And you got the same question to you. Like you were married to Cliff. Like you have more of an inside track here than I do. Like what's the answer? If we could wave a wand, what would we do?
The first thing I wonder was like, do you think it's important to explain who Cliff was? I don't know who our listeners are, but we, of course, we know who Cliff was, but I don't know if he was from Trinidad and Tobago, born in 1937, and he was one of the most influential figure in the steel pan world, especially in the United States. And you can Google, like if people want to know more about Cliff, and we will, continue to talk about him. But, I completely, Mia, when you were talking about, explaining like why it is, how some Trinbagonians may look at people from the United States, I just kept hearing Cliff's, voice saying like, yes, Mia, yes, Mia. I could just like really hear that.
Yes, Mia.
Yeah. But I've been thinking so much about cultural appropriation and things like that. And, something Mia mentioned during the panel discussion at the NSSBE conference is one person asked, why is it that, some bands in Trinidad and Tobago wear flower shirts? What about that? And Mia answered by saying, well, that goes with a theme sometimes. And I started thinking more and more about it. And I thought, well, that is just one of the uniforms or outfits that Trinbagonians wear. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if people from the United States saw that and associated that with Hawaii, which is another tropical island, and thought, we'll go with that outfit because it's tropical. Mm. And that just stuck with it. And then, of course, like bands like Jimmy Buffett, have that image. And people fell in love with Jimmy Buffett, and people started to play pan because they saw Robert Greenidge, who is an amazing, amazing steel pan player, arranger, composer, everything, and thought, oh, I want to play like Robert. Okay, so this is what I'm going to wear. And they started doing that, and that stuck with it. And just like what you said, Josh, those people may have not ever met Trinidadians, so they may not understand. So what they know is what they know. And they may be able to read, Google, whatever. But just like what you said, Josh, Cliff, he's the one who changed everything for me too. And before I met Cliff, or before I came to NIU and met many friends from Trinidad and Tobago, I didn't know much about Trinidad and Tobago.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of people who are like that in the US who just never had that opportunity to meet. So they just don't know, like they may have not been exposed to what we've been exposed to. It's like, so where do we go from here? Like,
Yeah.
what do we do?
I wish I would have been the person asking the question on that panel, Mia, because, and I wish I want to hear your answer, because the flowered shirt thing is funny, because I played a lot of steel drum gigs at Akron. Larry was always getting us gigs, and Matt too. Like, it was great experience. Like, I learned more about just how to be a functioning musician on a gig, like how to show up on time, how to be appropriately dressed, and know my music and all that stuff. But you're often asked to wear flowered shirts, and there was a point in my undergrad, I think, when I came back from Trinidad, where I was like, no, can't do it anymore. And so I went like the step over, which was like the Cuban shirt, which with like the little piping, just one color, kind of classy looking, just very simple. And when I first moved to New York, I got the job with So Percussion. I'm like, I'm playing in this percussion group, but I'll freelance on the side because we're not making any money over here. There's some pancakes, right? And so I go to play a wedding in New Jersey, play the wedding, wear my shirt, and I get fired. And they email me and tell me they'll never hire me again. I'm like, what?
Why?
Did I sign out? They're just like, you didn't follow the contract. The contract said to wear a flowered shirt, and I wore the Cuban shirt. And there was a part of me that kind of was like, I felt kind of proud that I got fired for that. but then I was like, okay, all right, maybe I'll never work for that person again. Anyway, fast forward, So Percussion's going to Trinidad last year. And Jason, I've been, those guys, they didn't do a whole lot of freelancing like I did in college. And so I'm telling them about this and how I hate flowered shirts. I've been given the hat with the dreadlocks sewn into it and been asked to wear that on gigs. And I just been like, yeah, sure. When they turn around, I'll just hang it on my pan. And then 10 minutes later, it's on the ground. And then it's in my bag. Like, eventually it disappears. But I've been telling Jason, Adam, and Eric about like flowered shirts. Like, that's just not what people wear on gigs in Trinidad. And it's like, it's not even what people wear around. Like, sure, will you see one? Yes. But, like, it's not. Anyway, so we show up to the drag at finals night. And what the hell is Phase 2 wearing? All flowered shirts and straw hats. And I was like, Boogsy, 1 year? You can't just give me 1 year of, like, orange jumpsuits or something? Like, this is the year you're going to do flowered shirts. And so I had to change my rule, which is, okay, I will not wear, the only person who will make me wear a flowered shirt is Len Boogsy Sharp. He is the only one who I will wear a flowered shirt for. But what was your answer, Mia, on the panel? You mentioned the theme thing, but did you go into any more detail?
Yeah, well, somebody asked, but people wear flowered shirts in Trinidad. So, what? And I said, well, that's because it's a costume, because, for Panorama, what you wear is representative of the music or the theme of the song, usually.
Yeah.
So if someone is wearing a flowered shirt and a straw hat, it probably has maybe like a tourist theme or something that has to do with the song. So it's a costume. It's not let me go play, let me go walk down the street and let me go, and I'm wearing a flowered shirt. Like that's, yeah, do people have flowered shirts? Probably, but it's the way in which it has been adopted in the US as this sort of representation of Trinidad and Tobago's pan culture is just incorrect, because like you said, somebody just saw, that one performance where they were wearing that one flowered shirt, and decided that that's what they're going to go with. And I, even for All Stars for so long, just a few years ago, they kind of had on these kind of flowered shirts too. But it was, the costuming, I wasn't part of the costuming decision or conversation, but my guess is that it's about a tourist. It's So Long I Ain't See You. The song goes, so long I ain't see you, give me a wine. So it's about haven't seen somebody in a long time, maybe because they came from away. So the idea of the flowered shirts is kind of like a touristy kind of costume. It's not something a Trinidadian necessarily will wear every day. It's more representation of, oh, this is what you probably look like if you haven't seen me in a long time because I came from the United States. You know, kind of concept. So, but whereas other people may have interpreted it as, oh, that's what Trinidadians wear, you know, in Trinidad to play pan, and that's just not the case. It's just costume.
Yeah, I was gonna. There are people. Sometimes the answer can be. I mean, this is the thing. Like, I'm not a parent. Mia, you're a parent now, and I'm sure you know you're. I don't know anything about raising a child, but you know, there were moments in my life when people said, "I'm sorry, they've earned the right to do it, and you haven't." Like, you know who can wear a flowered shirt? Robbie Greenwich.
Oh, right.
You know who's never going to question him about that? Me. You know who gets to tell their band that they can wear flowered shirts? Bugsy Sharp. Are you Bugsy Sharp? No. maybe it's okay that you spend longer than 5 seconds of thinking about this before you don your flowered shirt and stand at the edge of a swimming pool for somebody's luau party. And guilty as charged. I'm not saying this because this is something I haven't ever done and would never do. If I hit hard times and I needed to pay my rent and someone said, I'll pay you $400 and you got to feed your family, I would swallow my pride and probably do it and probably never tell you about it. but like, if you have control over it, you should think about it. And if you can get away with the Cuban shirt with the piping that's just one color, or just a classy looking shirt, push that boundary. It's okay. You know, like, you know, sound good, first of all. If you sound bad and you're wearing a flowered shirt, get out of here. Like, that's you've missed the whole thing.
Right.
Yuko, do you have any, Mia, I want to be respectful of your time. We have now stolen 1 hour and 7 minutes of your life. And
that's fine.
Time flies, and you've got a child, and I want to be respectful of your time. I just have, like, Yuko, do you have a final sort of question you want to ask Mia before we wrap up here?
Where do you go? Where do you see, you know, the whole like pan community from different parts of the world going and like being able to work together? What does that mean? Like, is there going to be like the Olympics? You know?
Well, I feel as though we've already started, you know, I mean, just seeing certain things taking place, like
Pan and Unity.
Pan and Unity, the virtual steel band. And I was going to say Panorama too.
Yeah.
You know, so Panorama. So, you know, with virtual steel band, with Pan and Unity, with all of these different online performances that link people from all over the world, I think it's already a step in the direction of understanding Pan in different cultures and coming together. I mean, Panorama is also a good setting because so many people travel to Trinidad for Panorama that they sort of get that experience. But Panorama is heavily rooted in Trinidad and Tobago culture. Yeah. And I think it'll be nice for us to get to know what those other cultures are, where Pan is concerned in other countries, you know, which is why I was sort of so intrigued in Pan in Japan, because it's, even though there are similarities, there are huge differences with Pan in Japan that, because of the Japanese culture, has influenced, you know, certain practices within the steel pan community. And I feel as though that we should embrace that. You know, it shouldn't be, oh, you're not doing it like a Trinidadian, so you're wrong. I feel as though there's this balance that you can acknowledge that the instrument is from Trinidad and Tobago. You can respect it, and you can respect the people. You know, you can respect Trinidadians, respect Tobagonians, respect all the people who came before us, you know, and still sort of use the instrument for your creative voice. And I feel as though Japan has done this really well. You know, having these sort of collaborations, I would like to see more collaborations that could embrace the different cultures of Pan around the world, you know. And I know we spoke a little bit about the United States and how that, you know, the historically what negative things happened kind of influenced the relationship. But I see the relationship going in a different direction. You know, now that we have these online performances, is there work still to be done? Yes, of course, because we have steel bands that not acknowledging Trinidad and Tobago at all, you know, or not acknowledging or having practices that is disrespectful. Right? It's okay to use the instrument. Like, for example, in soul percussion, right? I have heard the pan perform these really fantastic compositions mixed with all of these other instruments. And I'm like, that's fantastic. And it's there's nowhere near there's a disrespect to Trinidad. And I feel as though there are some people, the way in which they adopt the instrument, they just don't get to know the country, don't get to know our people, and then they do what they think. So then it becomes this cultural appropriation or this cultural thievery or this cultural misunderstanding because they're trying to imitate without getting to understand. I think that's where the issue comes in. But embracing the instruments in a different way, and all of us getting to sort of know and this beautiful instrument that we love and how everybody's using it differently. I feel like that's where we should sort of be, going and continuing with these projects that, are online and virtual. And I hope we could have another ICP, maybe not for Panorama, but maybe it could be something like a composition competition, where we can really hear the different voices, from different countries and how they interpret music or how they like to hear music from on the steel band.
Well, I've been with Kendall. We've been doing a lot of listening because the steel band at Princeton is remote right now, and so we've been doing a lot of lecturing. And it's like going back and watching those videos of the World Steel Band festivals. Like, it's so awesome. Like, there's a video of Despers playing Barter Bride, and you see Robbie Greenwich up there just like ba-ba-dum, 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 and he's just like looking up at Pat Bishop, and he's just slaying, and Pat Bishop's up there conducting, and then you see Samaru Jets. It's like 4 people playing with the sound of 1,000, and anyway, it's just awesome. I feel like if there was like whatever the version of that is that meets the World's Fair, that meets ICP, like that would be awesome. That would be so rad.
Awesome.
Well, Mia, this has been. I will Venmo you $20 for the So Percussion shout out. That was lovely of you. I appreciate that. And I hope I don't get a lot of Japanese hate mail for my comment about the Japanese steel band up front. But this has been really great. I have learned a ton. Just every time I talk to you, and you as well, Yuko. So I can't wait to keep doing these. What my final question, Mia, for you, and then I'll let you go, is what hasn't the pan community done yet? Like, what do you want to see it in 20 years? What's the thing? Like, if you had control, if you had all the money in the wand that made things happen, what would be the thing that pan would be doing that it's not?
If it was me, I would bring all the steel bands in the world in one place and we all perform together. Because I've always had this concept in my mind that there should be like 1,000 people in one place. It's just like a Panorama practice on steroids, like just a massive steel, like I would just want to know what that sounds like. I just love to see people interact, just like how Japanese people come to Trinidad. And even though some of them may not speak English, it's like, you don't need to, because the language that's used is through the instrument, right? That current language. So I would love to see that. And I don't think that's happened as far as I know, where you have
it
like,
happen. We'll do it.
like in the savannah or somewhere outdoors where it's just
I do want to I do think a little language is important. I think you better know the difference between slight pepper and plenty pepper if you're going to be ordering doubles in Trinidad. That's an important. You would be on your butt sweating and possibly throwing up if you ask for the wrong slight or plenty on your doubles. So maybe that's a little piece of advice for folks traveling. Well, Mia, this has been awesome. Yuko, thank you so much. I really hope people get something out of this. I learned a lot. And one other tiny point that I just want to make. When you talk about people from Trinidad and Tobago, you say Trinbagonians?
Yes.
Okay, and that is the proper etymological word when we're talking about. We don't say Trinidadians, right? You say
yeah. People use Trinidadians loosely, but I think what's the better term is Trinbagonians, because that way you capture Tobagonians within that. When you say Trinidadians, you mean people only from Trinidad.
Right.
But I mean, there's kind of an understanding that if you say Trinidadians on an international level, you probably mean everybody. But the best thing to say, I think that's encompassing everybody, is Trinbagonians.
I appreciate it, and that is something I'm going to practice. I'm used to saying Trinidadian, and every time I do, I always say and Tobago. But like Trinbagonians is easier, and I'm going to practice that. So thank you for that, Mia. All right, well, Yuko, Mia, thank you so much for your time. This is really fun, and Yuko, I can't wait to keep doing these. These are going to be eye-opening and refreshing, I think. So thank you so much. I hope you stay safe and healthy, and
you too.
Good luck with the child, and I hope to meet the little one in person whenever the quarantine and the borders are open. So
yes, thank you so much. This was really fun, and looking forward to see some of your other interviews.
Yes,
because this is some really good conversation.
All right, well, thank you, Mia. Thank you, Yuko, stay safe, and we'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And it has a second parcel here, and it's not ringing enough for me.